Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Data Science Hangout. If you're joining for the first time today, it's nice to meet you. I'm Rachel. I think we maybe have some first timers from JD's Twitter post earlier. So the Data Science Hangout is an open space for the whole data science community to connect and chat about data science leadership, questions you're facing, and what's going on in the world of data science. So these sessions are recorded and shared to YouTube, as well as the RStudio Data Science Hangout site. So you can always go back and rewatch or find helpful resources. We can share that in the chat in just a second here. We'll also have a LinkedIn group for the Hangout too. So if you ever want to continue a discussion, or if you just want to meet somebody and talk in there, other than me being the one talking in there, feel free to use that. Tyler will, or Hannah will share it in the chat as well. Together, we're all dedicated to creating a welcoming environment for everyone. So we love when everybody can participate in these and we can hear from everyone. So there's 3 ways you can ask JD questions today. You can jump in by raising your hand on Zoom and I can call on you. You can put questions in the Zoom chat and just put a little star next to your question if you want me to read it out loud instead. Maybe your dog's barking or you're in a coffee shop or something. And then lastly, we also have a Slido link where you can ask questions anonymously too. And I see Hannah just shared that in the chat. Just like to reiterate, we love to hear from everybody, no matter your level of experience or area of work as well. So with that, I am so excited to be joined by my co-host for today, which there was a lot of excitement on Twitter about, JD Long, VP Risk Management at RenaissanceRe.
Well,
And
hey, y'all.
JD, I'd love to have you maybe start by introducing yourself and telling us a little about your role, company, maybe also something you like to do in your free time.
Absolutely. So I'm JD Long, and I've been in and around the R community in particular for a number of years. I love telling the story of the first time that I met JJ was he came to Chicago and they had this company. I can't remember if they were like stealth or if they were open, and they were going to make an R IDE and somehow or another make a business out of that. And it sounded kind of ridiculous, but I loved the idea that it was hosted on a server. And a bunch of us went out to dinner, maybe a bunch, maybe it's like 6, 7 of us. And JJ and the folks involved shared this idea of the RStudio editor. And I was like, well, I got no idea how they ever make a business out of that, right? Like, how do you compete with, Emacs? And I forget even what I was using. I may have been using Eclipse or something ridiculous for R at the time. So this is 13 years ago, and I was living in Chicago, but I was like, hey, I really like this idea. It's hosted. I immediately took RStudio and stood it up on an AWS EC2 machine and was running RStudio in the web, and I could connect to it from my browser. And I was like, whoa, it's like I can get a really big machine to do my stats on, from AWS and run RStudio on it. It feels like a native desktop application. I thought it was the most amazing thing I'd ever seen. They figured out a business model, it appears, as far as I can tell. And so, here we are. Now, what I do for a living is I do financial risk modeling for a reinsurance company. Most folks have never heard of reinsurance because we're not a consumer facing product, right? We're when you buy your homeowner's insurance, or if you're Travis and you're buying insurance for his RV, when all of those RVs converge in Florida and then there is a hurricane, the RV writers may not be able to cover that loss.
Okay.
Sorry about
that. Yeah, no problem. And so what reinsurance is we spread the risk of insurance companies around the globe by taking bits of risk from many insurance companies in many different regions all over the world and spread it around. Our only product is capital, is being able to spread that risk and pay claims to rebalance risk globally. So we're part of the global risk spreading mechanism that allows global finance to work, especially in the insurance industry. As a result, it's all about stochastic probabilistic modeling. So I spend my world and a lot of time discussing things like, how do we calculate the return probabilities and the tails of events. So the 1 in 100, 1 in 1,000. I was literally just teaching a class of how to do this with SQL using one of our internal systems. I do a lot of that. I teach a lot. I manage a small team. The team I manage does a whole lot of taking Excel that someone in the business has created, and we're part of the business. I'm not part of IT, but my team has a little more software experience, so they help port that Excel into typically Python, sometimes R, and run it using Airflow and have jobs automatically created so that the business can stop drowning in Excel hell. Right? Not that Excel isn't a great tool, it is, but sometimes we want things that are more automated that take no human touch to run. So I manage a team that does that. Most of my time isn't doing that. And I do a handful of, I'm in a team called Risk Solutions, and we joke that our team exists to answer the questions for which there is no easy button, right? We have internal applications, a whole lot of stuff can be done automatically. You hit the calculate button and it calculates something. Then somebody wants to ask a question that button wasn't designed for, and somebody's got to reach into the data, pull it out, understand it, and do a calculation. And that's the kind of stuff the risk solution teams does. We also do a lot of building prototypes of risk analysis. We also do a thing we call building productotypes. Everybody knows what that is, right? That's a prototype that you're actually using to show the board of directors. That's a productotype, right? So you've got a prototype, but you're using it in production. And then when we pass those off to IT, we call them no longer productotypes. That's a production system. So involved in that value chain. I live right now in Richmond, Virginia. I'm based out of the Raleigh, North Carolina office. That's about 3 hours away. When I go to the office in Raleigh, I stay for a few days. Like Travis, I got an RV, so I stay at a state park in Raleigh and hang out and go into the office, and then, invite folks over to the campsite to shit post in real life. And then let's see, other questions. My interest, I like building things. I've got an old Jeep in the garage right below me. That's become a really good Jeep because I took every single mechanical piece that had Jeep stamped on it and replaced it with something else and made it an incredibly better vehicle. Let's see. So I enjoy fabrication. I do metal and wood fabrication both. And I got a dog named Sparky who's over here asleep. And if he goes apeshit in a minute, y'all get to meet him.
We want to see the dog, and I think Asma also wants to see the Jeep. So
yeah, I should have taken it from the garage, right? Because I should have known that question was coming, but I didn't. Let's see if I'll get Sparky over here in a minute. I'll get Peanuts out because he always knows I drop peanuts when I eat peanuts, so he'll probably come running.
I see Ricardo has a question for you off the bat in the chat. Ricardo, do you want to jump in?
Sure, JD. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I can hear you great. Go for it.
Okay,
Ricardo.
thank you. So if you are modeling risk, I guess you are using heavy tail distributions.
Correct.
So do you have one that are your favorites? What kind of distributions do you use to model those unlikely events?
I'm gonna knock everything off my desk. So for distributions for heavy events, pardon me. Now I got to pick the pieces up I dropped. The way we think about modeling is we model individual risks and then we aggregate those up. So as opposed to we don't fit one distribution to represent the whole company. We have individual risks that we aggregate up. The property losses, which are a major component, right? So we think about hurricane, severe convective storm, flooding. We actually don't fit distribution shapes to those. We use an internal model that's an event-driven model, not a probabilistic distribution-based model. So we aren't fitting a distribution. We're actually simulating storms, simulating actual events, hitting areas we're interested in. So our North American model will simulate a number of hurricanes, right? And we'll do some, what we would call deterministic modeling. So that's not a probabilistic model. A deterministic model would ask the question of, if you might know the big hurricane in 2005.
Yes, I
Okay,
was
so-
there.
Okay, so Hurricane Katrina. But what's interesting about 2005 is it wasn't just Katrina. It was KRW, Katrina, Rita, Wilma. And there was actually a fourth named storm that went into Florida, but those are the big three. So we will run a deterministic model against our portfolio that is a simulated footprint of those three events. And we will say model our current portfolio losses under the 2005 loss year, and we would call that a 2005 deterministic. We may have a different deterministic that is just Katrina to try to understand if those events were to play out again today, what would be the financial impact, right? Because we obviously property values are tremendously higher in 2022 than they were in 2005. So you can't just scale, in different areas of Florida would have grown faster or become valuable or had more development. So you can't just like take the number from 2005 and gross it up 20%, right? That's pretty coarse model. We actually want, and our footprint has changed. We have a different reinsurer footprint than we had then, which properties we reinsure. So we would run it against the current portfolio. So that's a deterministic. Our stochastic catalog would potentially include some deterministic events, but also have events we've never seen before. So Hurricane Katrina actually nailing Miami, right? That's a big tail event because that's worse than Katrina actually was. Or Hurricane Andrew, which came near hitting Miami. So our stochastic catalog is going to be synthetic events, hurricanes that didn't happen, but could have happened. And there are going to be events in there that have very low probability, that are really bad, and a whole bunch of average kind of years, right? A whole distribution of outcomes. So when we do an event-based model, there's no distribution fitting per se, there's event modeling. But when we come around and say modeling a casualty portfolio or an individual casualty deal, it's not uncommon there to use more of what I would call a curve fitting exercise. We just have some loss experience and we try to say, okay, what do we think that shape might look like? So we're literally fitting a distribution, and that's some black art, right? And the reason it is because we have so little data and we're in the world of long tail distributions. And so we're only getting a few observations, and by definition, almost always those ain't in the tail. And so we have to say, okay, we create some a priori assumptions about what we think that may look like. We may use something that feels a little Bayesian. And we try to model things that way. And we'll use a host of different distributions to get those, right? So there's a number of things you might do to get long tail. Sometimes I'll run it through literally like a best fit and say, try to give me run 50 different distributions through there, and I'll kind of look at them. And we also have some a priori beliefs about what the assumed underlying pricing might be. So we'll bring those into the modeling. So that's in the casualty lines is much more likely to look curve fitting, while over in property, it's more likely to be a event-based simulation instead of curve fitting. Now, I didn't give you the names of a list of distributions I like because it varies wildly, but did that help a little bit?
Sure, I appreciate. Thank you.
You betcha.
JD, I know in the beginning you mentioned that you help the business from drowning in Excel. And I'm curious, what is one of your favorite examples of helping the business with something that was just maybe taking people just way too long or mess up?
Yeah, let me give you a design rather than one specific one, because it's if I tell you, some legal entities risk reporting board of directors book, right? That's not, nobody knows what that looks like.
Right.
I didn't know. Right? So let me give you the big picture. So every organization I've ever been in 25 years or more of work has always had these spreadsheets where it's there's a tab, it's got a query in it. Somebody takes that query, pastes it into an IDE, maybe changes a date or something, gets a result, takes the results, paste them back into Excel, build a pivot, and then they also build a bunch of other stuff, right, off of that. Maybe they have 3 queries they run, right? And these get built because people have hammers and they're going to find nails, right? They're going to solve problems. People are crafty as hell. And you often get folks in the business who have cobbled together enough SQL, or they got someone over in IT to help them write a little SQL. Excel's the only tool they really know, but they can copy and paste a query and maybe change, a value in it. And so they run this thing. And it is potentially error prone. It's often slow. They maybe only update it quarterly because it takes them a few hours to get all the fiddly pieces in place. And sometimes it's a good prototype, but it's probably not what they should be running like every day, right? If somebody ran this every day and it takes them an hour to update, they're not going to do that. So what we have gotten great mileage of is analysts coming in, and I joked when I pitched this on Twitter that the first thing we help people do is like fix their shitty Excel. And I'm not kidding. Like the first thing we do is maybe like, hey, let's make this Excel structured more logically, because we'll do things like, all right, like let's make it flow from tabs left to right. Call me crazy. It's a little bit easier to read, right? If you're from a country where you read right to left, maybe organize it that way. I like to organize left to right. I want the very first page to have any inputs. So like if you have to have a date as an input or a key from a system or something, we're going to have a little block on the first page that's all of our inputs. Instead of having them spread across 5 or 6 different tabs buried, cell D76 has a magic number in it. We're going to get all that over on this inputs piece. So we're going to have inputs. And when we change those inputs, we may do something like, just do simple string replacement. So that gets put in the query. Right, really basic stuff, and make sure we understand how this thing works, and then we're going to test it, make sure it still works. And then we say, cool, well, how about if instead of copying and pasting this Excel, we were able to just, this SQL, we will just run this SQL every night, and then we'll just create a database connection between Excel and the table where we put the results of your SQL and not break the rest of it, right? So step 1 is, this is that like minimum viable product thing. Sparky says, hey, minimum viable product, where it's like you start with a skateboard and then you build a kickboard and then you build a bicycle and then you build a motorcycle, right? So we're helping folks do that. We're not going to come in here and be like, that's ridiculous, let's throw it away and build you an application. It's like, let's just take a piece of this out and automate it. See if we can make your life better. And we'll iterate on that. And if it's like, so I have 2 analysts that work for me who do this for supporting one of our teams internally. Their goal is every one of those that they want to turn it into a fully automated process. So they will take every one of these all the way through to a system that typically, if it has any Excel in it at all, it's only the last step drops results in Excel. No calculations in Excel. It's like Excel is a reporting format because some folks really like to see that. And we have one partner, an external partner, that needs it in Excel because they use it as part of a process after that. Excel's how they want to pick up our results and put it into their system. So we format it exactly how they want. So the process is make little changes, see if we can take some pain points out, keep iterating. And we'll keep Excel in there for a while. And sometimes what we find is if we just make it less painful, they can use it more and we'll stop. Sometimes we find we want to turn it all the way into a fully automated process that runs every day in Airflow, updating a database. And then we have a reporting tool on top of the results. I am a big fan and very strong believer in do your data transformations before your reporting tool, as opposed to doing a bunch of data transformations in the reporting tool, because reporting tools are where business logic goes to die, right? Or it goes to get calcified. The other problem is we end up reproducing business logic in a bunch of different reports, often in inconsistent ways. So if we have a calculation, I'd really like to make that done in the central place using code that's in Git, not buried in Power BI code, which is hard to put in Git, or buried in Tableau code, which has the same problems, right? So I try to have those reporting tools mostly being like pull from the calculated values, and maybe you have to do some division, right? Because you can't pull, if you want to scale ratios, you need to actually pull the numerator, pull the denominator, and then do the math in the reporting tool. But the analysts try to move things in that direction is the big principle. And the other big principle is in small steps, moving towards the Platonic ideal of a fully automated process that runs without human interaction and has business logic calculations that are completely decoupled from the reporting. Like that's the Platonic ideal. We don't always take everything to that Platonic ideal.
Okay, so that's the Platonic ideal, but I see Carl had a question. There's a star there, so I'll read it. Do you ever recommend replacing Excel workflows with dedicated no-code, low-code, like visual data prep tools instead of using R or Python? If so, how do you think about the choice?
Yeah, I got earbuds dying. Hang on just one second.
Okay.
We'll do one earbud and swap them back and forth, see how this works. Because I'm afraid I'm using external mic. I'm afraid if I put it
Still
on
sounds
speakers,
good.
I'm gonna have a problem. All right, good. Because I'm external mic, so I hope it's all works. All right, so I like the low code, no code on the reporting side, with the annoyance that it's hard to get it in version control, and that bugs me, right? So I like Power BI is reasonable for making a report or a dashboard. Tableau is reasonable for making reports in dashboards. It drives me batty with some of the naming. Like if you want to do tabular reporting, you use Power BI paginated something, and it used to be called SSIS. It's the same product, right? Anyway, some of that drives me crazy. But those are great. But the challenge I have with low code, no code is, as a general principle, is they basically mean you get 75 or 80% of a workflow that's visual. And then you got this cell and you shove all the code in that cell because you can't quite do everything in the tool. And most of the tools have the ability to let you write some piece of code, R, Python, SQL, something. And so we have basically now what we've done is really hidden our code in these little magic cells inside a low or no code that doesn't fit well in version control. And it feels a lot of times like the worst of both worlds. I've now taken the bits that could be in code and I've hidden them, tucked them away. It feels to me an awful lot like putting code inside a cell in Excel. It's like kind of frustrating. The way I wish these tools worked, and I use AWS Glue some, and Glue kind of works this way. You use the low code, no code tool and it generates code. And then you have code and you can do whatever you want to with it. I like that model a lot. So in the R community, we have Esquisse for making, and forgive me for if any francophones here will know I'm pronouncing that wrong. But the Esquisse tool allows one to use kind of a drag and drop and interactive UI to make ggplot code. And then when you're done, it gives you the ggplot code. And then you go put that in your script and you can tweak it a little bit by hand, or you can do other stuff with it. But it's like, it's like a GUI for writing code as opposed to a no code solution. I like that a lot better because I end up with code. Now, I think some kind of magic great world would be if I had low code, no code tools that generated code. And I could like have the GUI on one side, the code on the other side, and I could edit the code and the GUI would change, or I could edit the GUI and the code would change. Like that's really hard, right? That's a pain in the ass to implement. So nobody does that. But that would be a Platonic ideal for how I wish these pieces of tools would work. So to answer the question about do I use some of those tools, I like them. I worry about getting code locked inside of them that's hard to see in GitHub. I want all business logic to live machine readable in GitHub. So we can do stuff like, hey, if we change this table name, how many queries is this going to impact, right? Just search GitHub. We can see them. We can see all the ones, right? I like stuff like that. And I think having a tooling interface, a plain code interface with our tools and, version control and tracking and all that is so powerful. I hate to give that up just so I can get lots of people writing mediocre versions. So I'm a little cynical. All right.
Thank you for that answer. I see, Connor, you asked a great question in the chat. Do you want to jump in live and ask it?
Sure. Yeah, I had a project a while back where we had kind of a small data set with very expensive data, and there wasn't a lot of correlation between the variables, but we had a fairly strong hypothesis about what was happening, but it was difficult to validate that with the data. So I was wondering, like, what you do in situations where like that, where stakeholders have a pretty good idea of what's going on. They want to prove it with the data, but the data is sparse and lacks information.
Yeah, that's a good question. I can think of a few situations in my life where I've been there. The first thing I want to do towards the purpose of intellectual honesty is I like to be real transparent with folks I'm working with what we're doing, right? So we're kind of doing a validation exercise, which is a little different than like a discovery. And actually, we may not even be doing hypothesis testing. Right. Because folks often don't really want to know if we can prove or disprove that they're right. They really want to ask the question. And I apologize, my statistic language, I should be able to say this in terms of inference and what it means. And I'm hesitant to use the terms of art for fear I may misuse them. But in principle, what we're doing is we're saying, is there evidence that supports this thing we want to believe? We're not really looking to disprove it, or we may be, but usually we're just looking to say, this is our intuition. So it's almost like this is our Bayesian prior. Is the data inconsistent with our prior? We're not really asking to prove it. And so sometimes when I get a situation like that, we go looking for evidence that supports this conclusion we're starting with. And often the best we can say is we can't really find a lot that supports or disproves it. That does not mean in any way, shape, or form it's an incorrect hypothesis. It's just hard to see evidence of that in the data. But we have an a priori belief that we can't disprove. Now, often I'll go ahead and peek and see if we have anything in the data that would be a strong indicator that that's incorrect. Now, that may be a career-limiting move if you're at an organization that doesn't have a healthy relationship with the truth. I have worked in some of those organizations. The organization I am at currently, I've been with for 13, 14 years. We have really healthy relationship with the truth, and lots of people that are very comfortable saying, I think this is what the answer is. And I can say, I see no evidence in the data, but I find strong evidence to the contrary. And their response is not get out, but is, oh, really? Right. And so it depends on your organization. If your organization is a get out organization, that isn't going to work as well as if your organization is an oh, really organization. So if you can point out the oh, really, and maybe, the thing I always try to do is be high empathy. Right. So it's not like you're stupid. The answer is this, which I have seen done. That's low empathy response. It's I can't disprove it. I see some evidence to the contrary. Maybe we should look into this, that, or the other. The other thing I often try to look for is, now that very different than this, is say, okay, when I'm digging around in this data, might this be a situation where rare events are causing disproportionate effect? That's another way of saying nonlinearity. So there's two things that make modeling any system really hard: nonlinearity and feedback effects. And the presence of either of those or both of them, God forbid, right? So let's pause right here and think, what types of systems have nonlinearity and feedback effects? I'm an economist by training, and this is why macroeconomics always feels like a black art and like not like a real set of analysis is because there's nonlinearity and feedback effects in the economy. It's tremendously hard to model. It's tremendously hard to calibrate parameters because of all the nonlinearity, feedback effects, lag effects, all that sort of thing. Similarly, over the last 2 years, we have all gotten a tremendous education in how hard epidemiology is, right? Those of us who couldn't even pronounce epidemiology 4 years ago have learned that epidemiology is full of nonlinearity and feedback effects. That makes it really hard. And so a lot of times when I'm come to a data set and I'm seeing no effects that I would theorize are there, I try to think about and drill into the data and see if there is possibly some nonlinearity or possibly some feedback effects, because both of those will mess up correlations, right? So you may show a data that has relatively low correlation because correlation is an average across a range. It's boiling that down to average of the relationship across a range. If that value is of one variable is 0 most of the time, and occasionally it's 1, and the impact over here is continuous and is noise, but when this one goes to 1, this one doubles, that correlation is going to look not very significant, but it may be a real meaningful effect, right? So that's kind of it's not this variable isn't linear, right? It's usually 0, occasionally it's 1. This one's noisy, but when this one goes to 1, it doubles its range or something, right? So that's an example of a non-linear relationship that's really hard to get linear correlations out of that tip you off to what's going on. So sometimes I go digging in looking for those, or if there's some kind of feedback effect of some combination of two variables interacting with each other is having an effect you want. So I guess that's the big picture.
That's
that's
hugely helpful.
Okay,
That's-
cool. Good.
That's great. That
Because
made
in
me
some ways, I
think-
feel like I gave you a non-answer. My first part of my answer was if your organization is effed up, they may not want to hear you. And the second part is, well, there's a couple of things that I have gotten bitten by that I have scars from. Here's what they are. Good luck. So,
No, they've got a good relationship with the truth, but that definition of nonlinearity is the best I've ever heard, and that was hugely helpful. Thank you.
you're very welcome. Very welcome.
Thanks, JD. So I know when I reached out to you first about the Hangout, I had just watched your conference talk from a few years ago on empathy and action and building communities of practice.
Mhm.
And I see that somebody Brian just asked a question about that as well. Brian, I'm curious, are you starting to build a community as well?
Yeah, we've had a community of practice for a few years, but it's always a work in progress, and it's difficult. We have a federated model of how we do data science, and not by design, but by it's just organically sprung up that way. I work for Delta Airlines. I work in a group that was part of Northwest Airlines before the merger, and so we had a centralized operations research group, which has become the data science group. But other groups have sprung up within operations, within maintenance, within marketing, and so we started a mailing list a few years ago. We just send stuff out to kind of get people interested in data science. We probably have 500 people on our mailing list. Now we have a monthly meetup where we typically have 70 to 80 people who will tune in for a deep dive on a project.
That's great.
But I noticed the last few days there were some disparaging comments about the phrase best practices, just as we're about to have a panel session on best practices. But so anyway, I just wanted
you want
to
feedback on
more
best
about that.
practices, or should I stay away from that?
No. Dive into the controversy, JD. That's what we're here for.
So here's my thoughts on best practices. By the way, it sounds like a thriving community, right? I'm in an organization that only has 600 people in the whole organization, right? So a community of analytical thought people where you can get together and have 80 people seems just tremendous to me, right?
Yeah, we probably do have 80 analytics people, but we have 500 people on our list. There are pilots and flight attendants, people who are interested in data science.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. All right, let's discuss best practices. There was kind of a thread discussion on Twitter about this. The one of the things I learned from that discussion is someone opined saying in medicine, best practice has a very different meaning than how I see it used in business, right? In medicine, it's like we have practices, and this is the best kind of known practice for something, right? It has a very specific meaning. That's almost never how it's used in business. What I often hear is more like the comment someone else made, and I think I had amplified this, of it usually means I have organizational status over you. I want you to shut up, is what best practice often means. I'm going to end this conversation by saying this is best practice, right? And, I kind of joke internally, I don't have people in my organization that operate like that. We're low on assholes, long on intellectual curiosity. So if somebody says something or another is a best practice, I was like, okay, well, cool. Well, we want to be better than that. So let's talk about how to do it well. Like, that's my joke, is best practice means average. And we don't want to be average. And I'll give you an example of this very specific that we just went through in our organization, that in my mind shows a lot of good thought. So we implemented a best practice for system passwords. So we have system accounts. And we use for our, these automated processes that I talked about, we use system accounts for database access or whatever. And as a best practice, our ops team had a very large character set that included some particularly pernicious special characters like ampersands, semicolons, and backslashes, I think, all produce real challenges on different systems. And there's kind of some hoops you can jump through to handle some of these. But the bottom line is, what you want in a password is lots of entropy. The character set with a password this big and a big character set gives you a certain amount of entropy. You can lower the character set and lengthen the password and get the same or more entropy. What you care about is entropy. Nobody gives a crap that there's special characters in there if you know what you're after is entropy. But best practice is use big character set. So a bunch of us were having systems that were barfing when the passwords would get rotated, and we would end up with like an ampersand in the password, and certain code systems were falling over on the password because it was causing problems. And we went to our security team and we said, we know why. What's that?
I said, quick question in between. What is entropy?
So entropy is the amount of randomness, right? What we really care about is how hard is it to guess? And we'll use entropy as a proxy for how hard would it be for a search loop that was going through every character and making the password. How long would it take that to guess that password? That's what we really care about. That's the thing we really care about. But yet, our best practice is, 8 characters and a big character space. So each one of these values can be 50 different things because we include special characters. We went to them and said, let's take special characters out because they're causing us some pain, and let's make it really long because we don't care about length. Length is easy. It's an automated system, right? But these special characters are giving us a problem. And our ops team said, oh, that makes sense. Cool. Are we not doing best practice? No. Are we accomplishing our goal? Hell yeah, we are. And we've got more entropy than we had when we were using the character set with the special characters, because we made them a lot longer. We just use a smaller character set. So if someone's trying to brute force it, actually it's harder to brute force our passwords now with no special characters than it would have been to brute force them with the special characters in there, because we made them really long. And that's an example of, if we're using our head about what is the problem we're actually trying to solve and not hiding behind this is best practice, we get to a better outcome. And it's because we had, I hate to sound like a Stephen Covey book or something, but we started with the end in mind. What's the thing we're optimizing? We want passwords that are hard to guess. All right. How do we accomplish that? Subject to the constraint of special characters or giving our systems problems. That's an example of, I think, bucking a best practice, but doing it thoughtfully. because you understand the principle. And I think we need to have openness in our organizations to do that. I think a lot of best practices, you know, I watch folks do stuff that they inherited from, you know, Google does it this way or Facebook does it this way. And that should be the best practice. And I'm always reminded of a very particular anecdote. So I'm going to tell y'all an anecdote. There was a woman whose mother taught her, and I should retell the story with a son, right? That feels kind of sexist, but I'm sorry, I'm already in now. I'll not change. The woman had learned to cook a ham at Thanksgiving from her mom. And later she's married, she has her own kid, and they're cooking a ham at Thanksgiving. And the little kid asked the mother, why do you cut the end, the bony bit off the ham before you cook it? And she's like, I honestly don't know. That's the way your grandmother always did it. So I do it the same way. Let's call grandma and ask her. So they call grandma and they say, Grandma, why do you always cut the hock off the ham before you cook it for Thanksgiving? And grandma said, well, ham wouldn't fit in my pan. And the principle being, understand why we're doing these things, right? If you don't have a pan that's too small, there's no advantage to cutting the hock off. And I feel like a lot of times people replicate what they see, you know, Amazon, Facebook, Google doing. They don't understand what problem they were solving. But yet they say we should do that. We should cut the hock off our ham because Facebook's cutting the hock off their ham. I'm not sure we got the same problem Facebook has.
Before leaving the communities of practice discussion, though, I am curious, what does your team do to get people together?
All right, so we have a couple of informal communities, right? So one kind of formal community is we have a team called Risk Solutions, right? I'm a VP on the Risk Solutions team. We get that whole team together periodically. We get them together on a virtual call once a week. They have a meeting that the analysts lead, and we usually only have one or two of the managers actually go to that, because the purpose is it's to be led by the analysts, the doers, and the people who are managers don't lead it, don't interject themselves unless they're asked a question of, or at the very end, there's a time for Q&A. So we try to get, that way we're trying to develop a community of peer support in our analysts, not driven by managers, right? That's driven peer to peer. So they lead the meeting. They have a spreadsheet where they track who's leading it each week. It rotates. They bring in speakers from inside the organization or outside the organization to come in and speak to that group. And then they do Q&A at the end, and love that, right? Because it's pushing down ownership of development and team and all this stuff down to the analyst level, as opposed to being something dictated by people like me. I love that for a way to build community. We have told them, we want you all to do this, but what you do during that time and how you do it is up to you. And they have sort of grown with that. That's one community. The other example of communities are things like we use Dremio internally as our data lake, and really like Dremio. So we have a Dremio community internally. It has its own, we use Microsoft Teams, so it has its own Teams channel where people can ask Dremio questions. We periodically do a Dremio meetup where all the people in the organization, you know, finance, risk, actuarial, whoever, who are using Dremio get together. So there'll be a couple of presentations. So that one cuts across different business units. That's a great little community, like that a lot. I have led, and we've kind of let it fizzle the last year or two. I had led a more of a data science community, and we would do topics like, how do you make a good Jupyter notebook? Like, what's the characteristics of a good Jupyter? And that was driven by me going in Git and seeing like Jupyter notebooks with 500 lines of code in 3 cells and 2 comments and no rich text. It's like, why are we even in a notebook, right? Like, this isn't the spirit of that Knuth had in mind with literate programming. This is just a Python script or some kind of script dumped into a notebook instead of dumped into a text file. It's like, I would even hope if this wasn't a notebook, it would have more comments than this. And so it's like, okay, let's talk about what a notebook could look like or should look like. And so we do a presentation on it, things like that. I'm trying to think what we have a Power BI community internally, because we use Power BI and we have a couple other, and they are evading me. We have a data in our data science user group is also our Jupyter Lab users. So in Jupyter Lab, that includes R and Python kernels and RStudio, and we also have VS Code in our Jupyter Lab environment. Just anybody cares, that's what it looks like. So we have multiple things running in that, hosted and running remotely. So if anybody has questions, they raise those in that Teams community. People sometimes ask me about starting communities because I started the Chicago R user group 13, 14 years ago. And the design pattern for that group was, I think, a really good one. We had about 4 or 5 people who were gonna get together, drink beer, and talk about art anyway. And what we effectively did was, let's get in the types of presentations the 4 or 5 of us would like to hear, and then invite other people. And if they don't show up, we don't really care, because we're going to drink beer and listen to this anyway, because we're interested in this. And that community grew wildly, with me running it like as a benevolent dictator, just getting the presentations I wanted to hear. And then one of the things I observed is we were getting lots of new users of R. So I decided once a month we would have a beginners meetup. Sorry, not once a month, once a quarter or something. Anyways, some period, it's been a number of years. It's been too much drinking beer since then. But we would periodically have a beginner's night. And at the beginner's night, we would make sure we had 2 things. One is topics appropriate for beginners, right? So no sophisticated stochastic gradient descent garbage. It's like grouping and summing. and getting environments set up, or updating packages, all the normal stuff people have friction with. Focus on that. And then we would make sure we had, like, I forget what we called it. I would call it now like a learner's salon or something. We had a handful of people who were more experienced who said, I will sit at a table, and anybody that brings their computer with questions, I will answer. And we would have, really senior people with lots of experience there doing Q&A, and people could bring their own problems, literally eat pizza, drink beer, and look at code. And those beginner nights were super helpful. And so anyway, when people ask about building communities, I recommend those 2 things. Get yourself a core group of small number of people, get the presentations you would want. If the beginner concept is germane to what you're doing, you have beginners around who may be intimidated, do explicit beginners nights. And a big fan of having the extended Q&A or tutoring time. Those were hugely helpful.
That's great. Thank you. I can remember, JD, at the San Diego RStudio conference, I was talking to you out by the pool, and I was telling you I was going to start maybe doing the Boston Use R group, and I wasn't sure like how to get it started. And I was thinking, should I make this form and have people submit, and then we could vote on talks and all of that? And you're like, oh, you might be able to hear me. I'll keep talking. JD, you can't hear me, but I'll tell people you can join as you join. But JD had shared with me, like, when someone wants to give a talk, just let them. Like, if people are interested in coming to this community and sharing different ideas and have topic ideas, don't try to like overly do it by having a form and having people vote. Like, yes, it's great to be able to source lots of ideas, but you don't have to make it so formal.
I did very little voting. I did the benevolent dictator approach because, I don't know. I feel like I did some voting on things a few times, but it was voting for input for me, not deterministic voting. They weren't giving the outcome. They were voting to signal to me what's important to them. And I integrated that in my own objective function and then made a bunch of decisions. So it was more representative, not I'm going to run this group and let them vote on everything. But people lack creativity. And so I found that by being a little bit creative and taking that as input. So that's like the first time we did the beginners night, nobody voted on that. Somebody recommended it, and I was like, oh, that sounds great, let's do it. We tried it, and then I did ask afterwards, like we did some voting about what frequency to do the beginners night, and I was surprised how frequent people wanted it. That was the surprise for me. So we did it more frequently than I would have otherwise.
Yeah. Did we kill your headphones?
Yeah, totally dead. So I've got you on speaker now, and I'm turning the mic on and off to try to stop feedback.
It sounds okay. Timothy, I see you have your hand raised. You want to jump in?
Yeah, I just have a sort of general brainstorming topic. It's not really necessarily attached to your personal experience, but I kind of feel in I do clinical research, and our pipeline is you know, data of some sort to R and then to R Markdown or Shiny or different reporting endpoints. And particularly with R Markdown, we use a lot of templated LaTeX PDF output, for reasons, but mainly because we can't convince people to use HTML or whatever. But I feel like one of the problems we run into is that the separation of concerns between the computation or calculation and the formatting of the output is kind of broken, like in R Markdown, especially with LaTeX. And I've been looking at Quarto too, and I don't necessarily see that fixes the problem. And I was just curious if you had any ideas about, do we need a whole new framework as to completely separate out the way something looks from the way that, the pieces in it, the plots and the, tables were created. And you see a lot of packages rise up to address this challenge by, saying I can format this line and I can bold this and all that, but it still doesn't change the fact of like, you need to have this LaTeX package installed, but not this one, and you need to have this one updated, but before this update, otherwise that breaks this, table formatting or something. But yeah, sorry for a long question.
Let me give you a couple of thoughts on the separation of concerns. There's kind of two parts here, and I'm going to talk about the separation of concern of analysis versus reporting. And then the other thing you brought up sounds like package management on the output side, especially at the LaTeX level. I got weaker thoughts there. I don't do that as much. The first part, the design pattern that I have had good success with, and I think is important, is this is a special case of it's easy to commingle what I would call business logic. It's not business logic for you. It's analysis maybe, but you can commingle that analysis with your reporting framework. And a lot of times we do that, especially when we first start, because it's like real convenient. Like I'm in this doc, it's got R, I'm going to do all my data manipulation and then output a result. Then I do all my manipulation and then I output a result. And next thing you know, you've got, 1,500 line R Markdown document. And somewhere buried in the middle of that is like free-form narrative explaining what's going on. And then there's hundreds of line R code. That's tough to maintain in my experience. That's not a really ideal thing to go in and edit. And what I have moved towards is having usually an R script, not even an R Markdown, an R script or a Python script that does all the data manipulation and calculates all the things. Now, this is what's different than a clinical world. In my world, almost anything I do, I'm going to want to do over and over. So I take the results, I tag them with like a date, time, whatever configuration tags I need, and I write them to a database. And that just runs on some sort of regular interval and populates that database, right? No reporting at all. It's just the manipulation, the calculation, whatever. And then when I come over to do the reporting, what the reporting does is it reads those effectively cached values and grabs what it needs for itself. And you got narrative, and then, but your R blocks are all about formatting the output. They're not doing any math particularly, or if they are, it's very limited. Mostly they're make the exhibit, the setup for the ggplot to do the graph, the table formatting to format the table. And so you end up with that second document being like everything in there is about presentation. And the calculation has a separate set of concerns that's over here in this other script. Now that R script that does the manipulation need not be run nightly or whatever, right? It could be run on an ad hoc basis if you're only going to run this, once a year or something. But that's the separation of concerns that I like. And I tend to do that when that our markdown documents getting out of control, or if I can see that it's gonna get out of control. Now, in terms of reporting environments and what packages you need installed in what order, especially when it comes to LaTeX, that just got Docker written all over it, I think. Because if you got to manage like 6 or 7 of these for each report has really bespoke and it can't coexist with the other ones, you could probably do that with virtual environments, but my virtual environment foo is not that good. And so what I would tend to do is probably overkill, but I would consider having, Docker instances that have all the packages installed in the right order in the right place, and just have a script that stands up the Docker machine, builds the R markdown, and the Docker machine tears it all down. It's a little bit kind of feels like killing a gnat with a sledgehammer, but it could be a way to solve that problem. I don't know exactly how hairy that problem is for you. I don't have that exact problem.
I'm going to rapid fire a few questions at you, and I'm going to say, let's do like a 30-second answer on them. So we can try and get to as many. Let's see. Okay. So Eric asked, do you have advice on how you navigate through complications when integrating multiple tools and frameworks together in a project? Eric said, I have major pains linking R to AWS as I speak.
Yeah, depends on the nature of the friction. I like clean interface points. And an example of a clean interface point is if the Python process writes out Parquet files and the R process reads that Parquet file, super clean interface, right? As opposed to having R running inside of a Python, or having Python running inside of R using reticulate. Those can be real useful, but I really like that clean separation. And for me, the new interface format is Parquet, right? It used to be CSV, and now I'd much rather use Parquet as the interface between all my steps. So to the extent possible, I like having Parquet files in S3 to be my interfaces. And then each script does one thing and knows what it's supposed to get. Maybe it's called by an orchestrator, and have those separate. Now, that probably doesn't address his integration point. If he wants to clarify, I'm happy to talk about it.
Thank you. A Slido question from earlier that was asked anonymously. I can't remember exactly what this is in response to, but was the less interpretability of the models ever a problem? If so, how did you get around that?
Interpretability of the models.
A hard word for me to say.
Yeah, it is a hard word. Okay, so for me, I'm not making that type of models. Most of what I do, I can get an awful long way on sensitivity analysis. So we just change all the inputs a little bit and look at how the outputs change. Or, some of my models, I'll change the inputs across a range and look at how the outputs change. And then I'll do sort of a marginal sensitivity on another variable, changing it across a range, plotting what the output looks like. In what I do, that is enough. Now, that obviously does not work necessarily if you're doing deep learning, or, but I'm doing very different kind of analysis. When it comes to interpretability, I'm a big fan of packages like, and I've not stayed on top of this world, so there's probably a bunch more, but like Lime, that help you interpret, why did this machine learning algorithm give this response? What were the features and why that it was focused on? I think those are super important, and it's a critical area, and I am not an expert there.
Thank you. Okay, we're already over anyway, so I'll let people ask their questions if they're still here. Catherine, I see you asked a great question in the chat a little bit ago. Would you be able to ask that live?
Sure. It may be a little more basic, but I was just curious about kind of how you go about helping communicating with the business side to help them automate something that they're working on, like how you go about learning and maybe codifying their pain points.
Yeah, so that's a really good question, and not too basic at all. As a matter of fact, it's kind of bread and butter. It's a really important thing that almost all of us will do to some degree, right? Is how do we partner with someone who doesn't have the technical experience we have and help them maybe see the benefits of what we're doing or see how it fits with them. The first thing I have found is it varies wildly by organization, right? So if you're in an organization, and I remember an insurance company that I worked at, that the actuaries in that organization were so committed to Excel. I remember one of the actuaries looking me in the eye and saying, I don't understand why. Now, this is a Fortune 500 company, let me say. And this actuary said, I don't know why we use Oracle for our GL. I could run this entire company in Excel. I thought he was joking. And I laughed and I looked at him, and to my horror, I discovered that he thought he was making a truthful statement. He had no idea what's involved in a GL, right? And like his Excel, reflected this, that it is my hammer, and by God, the whole world is full of nothing but nails. And in those situations, I'm a little bit of the mindset of I can't help people make their process better if they don't want to. I'm 50 years old and don't have enough, lifespan left for those kind of folks. So I don't try to change their mind particularly. I'm really interested in the folks, like the team that my analysts who report to me work for. The reason they exist is that team said, hey, Risk Solutions, you guys are automating a bunch of stuff and it seems to work really well. We've got this pain, and we have like people that we would like to be doing other stuff who are spending their whole life to care and feeding of these Excel spreadsheets. Can y'all like help us do this? And we said, yeah, we can, but what we need to do is we need to hire 2 people, and we will manage them so that because what happened, by the way, in the past in our organization and others, is they just kept hiring more Excel jockeys. So they just got more Excel, right? And so we said, yes, but we hire the people, we manage them. You pay them, you populate their queue, their priority queue. That model for us has worked fantastic, but it took those 2 pieces. We had to hire the people and we have to manage them. And then, so we end up working like a consulting service. So I have these 2 analysts that work with that team. That team controls the queue, sets the priority. And they want this, right? They're footing the bill, or, we don't normally think about like which balance sheet the cost of this employee is coming from, but they're paid by that entity in the organization. It goes to their HR budget. So they want what they're generating. Completely changes the dynamic versus, me looking over the shoulder and being like, I could help you script that. And they're like, you could also go the hell away. That's just not going to work. And I've been in that cycle before. So a big bunch of it is find places where there's motivated interest, and it really changes it. Now, what's hard in an organization is if your task from someone on high, you're tasked with making this team more automated and that team don't want to get more automated. That's really hard. And that's kind of, I think I would push back and say, I understand what my charge is, but you're asking, I can lead a horse to water, but I can't make them drink. And you're really asking me to drown some horses. And I just can't do that. Right. I need somebody else to help me with either motivating change, or you got to give me some other task, because I can't motivate the unmotivated. But if you can find a situation where the people are hungry for it, or asking to get out from under their Excel debt, it's a really different experience.
Thank you. Okay, one more question that I see I missed from earlier. Someone had asked, I know you said you're on the business side, but I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about the DevOps that supports your team. Are you managing Airflow and database on your own, or with support?
Yeah, so we have it would be in our organization, it would be just ops, right? It's not DevOps, it's just ops. And we have a really collaborative relationship with them. So we have a big database that runs in Redshift that we use a lot, and that's maintained completely by IT. And their responsibility is, make sure that's running, make sure it all does what it's supposed to do, make sure the ETL is loading every night. And then we are the single one. Yeah, we're probably the single largest consumer that's hitting that directly. Now there's a bunch of reporting processes that hit that system, but Risk Solutions is one of the biggest teams that's writing SQL directly against that Redshift cluster. So there we have a tight relationship. The team that runs that system, the IT team, I go to their stand-ups, right? When I say we have close relationship, well, not their stand-ups, I go to their weekly meetings. I am in their channel in Teams, their not channel, their private group chat for that team. And so I kind of moved in with them. And the reason I moved in with them is that's how close I want to work with them. And, you know, they'll be in their group chat talking about how something works. And if I know how it works, or I have some business experience, I'll just opine right there. Right. And they seem really appreciative of that, because I'm not just there to tell them what to do. I'm there to support them, there to maybe ask a quick, dumb question. Hey, I'm seeing this. Does that line up with what you all see? So, you know, I'm not communicating with them via tickets, right? We're not lobbing tickets at each other. I'm all up in their group chat. I've moved in with them. I go to a bunch of their meetings. At the end of every sprint, they do a show and tell of some of the things they have built. I go to all those. I tell them, you know, the cool stuff they're doing. I tell them it's cool. Right. And the reason is with the ops team, I want that kind of relationship, because what we do is completely dependent on working well with them. So I go out of my way and go to a bunch of extra meetings in order to build that relationship, make sure I'm aware of what they're doing, understand what they're doing, and have the relationships with them. Right. So our Risk Solutions team, the last time that risk data team, which is an IT team, did an offsite, we did our offsite at the same place at the same time, right? That's not by accident. So we could do some joint systems, joint sessions, and do some team building, and we could go to the bar together, right? A whole bunch of human relation stuff, because that relationship with these ops team is hugely important. I have worked at organizations where I only interacted them with lobbing tickets at each other, and it's awful. And I don't ever want to go back to living like that again.
I love that. That's super helpful. Thank you. Okay. This is very short, and then I will let you go. I promise. I see on Twitter you said you will give us 2 bourbon value plays that punch well above their price point. What are they?
Okay. I think I got visuals. I lied. I don't. So, Jim Beam, I'm not a big fan of like Jim Beam white label. It's like, you know, it's not that good of a bourbon, but Jim Beam makes a product called Jim Beam Double Oaked, widely available, relative value bourbon, $30 for a fifth or something like that at the Virginia ABC store. It is better than it should be for that price point, in my opinion, right? Anybody can pay, well, it's hard to pay any price to get Pappy Van Winkle, but if you want to pay a bunch of money, you can. So I'm always interested in, though, what's a good value? The other surprising value, we did I'm a member of a Scotch and whiskey tasting group, and we did a bourbon night a few months ago. And there was one particular bourbon that I found so interesting because it was caramelly and it didn't have like the biggest amount of flavor, but it was kind of extra sweet, and bourbon's kind of sweet anyway. And I was like, this thing tastes like an after dinner liqueur or something. Like, it's very different. I was just fascinated by this one. I'm like, it's a little different. And like they showed the bottles at the end. We were pure blind, didn't know what we were drinking. They just had numbers. And this thing was in a like plastic bottle, you know, the home wrecker style bottle, big plastic bottle. And it was ancient age. So if you know the bourbons, Ancient Age is a distillery, and they have a product called Ancient Age. So 2 ancients in there. That's their higher end, still in a plastic jug. But I was totally shocked by it, and I wouldn't show off the bottle if I had people over to the house, but I'd put that shit in a decanter and I'd serve it with dessert and tell everybody it's top secret. I can't tell them what it was. I sneaked it from Kentucky, and they'd go crazy for it. I almost guarantee it. So those are my 2 sleeper values.
Do you have a rye recommendation?
Yeah, and I'm drawing a blank on it. I'd have to go back and look in my records. But last time I was in Lexington, my brother-in-law turned me on to, I cannot remember. It was fantastic, and I'm just drawing a total blank. Sorry, all that build up for nothing.
No worries. Thank you.
Share it with us after.
Yeah.
Realize, JD, I'm gonna have to put a note on this one, like warning, this may contain bad words.
JD can't help himself.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you all for all the great questions as well. JD, the best place to get in touch with you and stay connected is at Twitter.
Yep, Twitter. I'm on LinkedIn as well. If you want to make a professional contact, you can message me on LinkedIn. I'm incredibly slow responding because I don't check that regularly. Much faster on Twitter. You can hit me on Gmail, jdlong@gmail.com. If you want. It's a pleasure talking to y'all. This is a lot of fun. Thank you.
Thanks, JD. Have a great rest of the day, everybody.